They didn't just take my job. They erased me, wiped me from calendars, Slack channels, and even the parking pass system like I'd never existed. One day I was running half the company's operations. The next, I was just a glitch in the org chart. No warning, no thanks, nothing. Have you ever been in a situation where you felt overlooked or unfairly treated at work, only to find a way to take control of the situation on your own terms? How did you handle it? Drop a comment and let me know what time it is, where you are, and where you're watching from. I see every one of you. My name's Alex Mercer. I'm 34. I used to run infrastructure and logistics for a mid-sized tech company in Denver. I wasn't some paper pusher. I knew where every server was buried, which vendors still invoiced via fax, and how to keep a company humming even when half the execs were off playing golf. I didn't have a flashy MBA, but I had memory. I had grit. And I gave that place everything. Years of 70-hour weeks, missed holidays, canceled vacations, and stress that turned my beard gray before 35. I wasn't a martyr. I loved the work. I loved building something that felt like it mattered. I started when the company was barely off the ground, 2 floors in a shared office space, and a budget that couldn't cover decent coffee. I stayed because I believed in what we were doing. I believed in the mission, sure, but mostly I believed in the people. Back then, even the CEO answered his own phone and got his hands dirty. We were scrappy. Real. Over the years, I moved up because I knew how to get things done. No drama, no politics, just execution. Then the new leadership came in. They smiled too much, said things like paradigm shift and culture refresh while gutting departments and outsourcing anything that didn't fit on a spreadsheet. I saw the writing on the wall, but I thought I was safe. I wasn't some relic. I'd led the transition to cloud infrastructure. I'd cut costs by 30% the year before. Hell, I'd negotiated most of the property leases we still operated under, but none of that mattered. They called me into a glass box on the 18th floor. Just me, the CEO, and an HR rep who looked like she'd Googled how to fire someone 15 minutes before our meeting. "It's not personal," they said. "Just a restructuring." I was out before I even finished my coffee. No severance, no handshake, just a 2-minute speech and a folder full of legalese they asked me to sign. I rode the elevator down like a ghost. My phone buzzed with meeting invites I was no longer part of. My badge didn't work in the parking garage. I sat in my car for an hour, staring at the dashboard, letting the anger rise in waves. Not because I was jobless, but because I had become invisible, disposable. And they thought I'd just go quietly. They forgot who I was. But I hadn't. It started with insomnia. I'd wake up around 2 a.m., brain spinning, heart pounding. I'd go downstairs, make a pot of coffee I didn't need, and just sit in the dark with my laptop. I didn't look at job listings, not anymore. I looked at floor plans, contracts, maps. I pulled up old files I'd backed up over the years. Not because I planned to, but because I was too careful not to. People thought operations was just about keeping the lights on. What they didn't realize was that I held the keys, literally and metaphorically, to everything that kept the place functioning. Years ago, when we were expanding fast, I was the one who set up the satellite offices. I'd negotiated lease terms in 5 states, drafted maintenance agreements, and, for some reason no one ever changed, I was named in the legal documents as the operational trustee for key properties, equipment, and certain facilities management rights. It was mostly a formality, a legal necessity for fast growth. Nobody ever bothered to update it. I guess when a guy does his job quietly and competently for over a decade, you forget to check if he still holds the keys to the kingdom. They never thought I'd come back. But I didn't need a badge to walk in the front door of our Arizona satellite office. Still had my old ID in my glove box. The guard recognized me. Shook my hand, actually. "They let you go?" he asked, eyebrows raised like it didn't make sense. "Mistake," he muttered as he waved me through. It was surreal, like walking through a dream of a life I no longer belonged to. But it wasn't a dream. I still had a desk in the system there. I still had digital access to our shared storage. And I still had one particularly juicy file no one else ever looked at: the Master Relocation Agreement. Back when we were smaller, we signed a deal with the city of Chandler, Arizona. Tax breaks, infrastructure support, the whole package, in exchange for promising we'd maintain a corporate presence there. The clause was buried in a document few execs ever saw again. But it was active. And it included a relocation trigger. If certain operational conditions were met, a clause could be enacted to move primary HQ functions to that location. Nobody thought it mattered. Nobody thought someone like me would ever touch it. But I did. Not out of revenge at first. It started more like an itch, a what-if idea scratching at the back of my brain. What if I flipped the switch? What if I moved the heart of the company? Not the people, not the stock, just the core designation of HQ as defined by our internal and external partners? On paper, that meant everything from federal filings to vendor contracts would start pointing to Arizona instead of Denver. It would send a ripple through logistics, HR, tax compliance, even payroll. A harmless ripple, I told myself. At first, I didn't do it all at once. That's not how you survive in operations. You don't pull the fire alarm. You loosen the screws, one at a time, quietly, thoughtfully. My first move was administrative. I submitted a change of record notice to the internal compliance portal, updating the registered HQ location to the Chandler address. As operations trustee, my credentials still worked. No flags, no alerts. The system accepted it like it was just another routine update. The funny thing about legacy systems is no one ever expects them to be used. Next came the vendors. I sent out formal address updates, citing internal consolidation. Most didn't question it. Vendors don't care where to send invoices as long as they get paid. Payroll took a bit more finesse. I forwarded the Chandler address to the third-party processor we'd switched to 2 years ago. That triggered a jurisdiction review. A quiet one. No alarms, but a few internal emails started bouncing around legal and HR. I watched it all unfold through the limited back-end access I still had, mostly through old shared accounts that were never deactivated. It was a strange kind of thrill. I wasn't hacking anything. I wasn't breaking in. I was walking through doors no one had bothered to lock behind them. The first real sign that someone noticed came on a Thursday. I got a call from Lisa Tran, one of the senior admins I used to work with. "Hey, weird question," she said. "Did you update our corporate registration address? I mean, it says you did. The system logs you. But why?" I paused. "Just tying up loose ends. You know how things were left." She laughed, awkward. "Okay, well, people are kind of freaking out. Mark's asking questions." Good. I told her I'd call her back. I didn't. Instead, I waited. Watched. Within 72 hours, their legal team was sending urgent clarification requests to state offices and filing last-minute amendments. But they were already too late. Several databases, tax, compliance, even their own cloud service agreements, had already auto-propagated the new address. In the world of corporate ops, sometimes the first record to update becomes the source of truth, whether you meant it to or not. What I hadn't expected, though, was how quickly things would unravel on their end. Friday morning, I got a panicked email, sent to my old address, which still forwarded to my private inbox, from a facilities manager asking why the property team in Denver was being told their space was no longer considered primary for lease extensions. Apparently, the clause I'd triggered shifted renewal authority to the Arizona location. Small oversight, huge consequences. By the following Monday, I was officially a problem. A ghost they couldn't explain. I imagined the meetings, Mark pacing a conference room, demanding to know how a guy they fired could still pull strings. But I wasn't sabotaging anything. Not yet. I was just correcting a record, using the rules they forgot to read. They fired me like I was nobody. Now I was the guy they couldn't ignore. They always say the devil's in the details, but in corporate America, the devil is the details. Especially when those details are scattered across 15-year-old contracts, dusty filing cabinets, and auto-renewing service agreements that no one's looked at since the Obama administration. I didn't break the system. I just used it better than they ever thought I would. By the time they figured out what I'd done, the cascade had already started. Vendors in Colorado began requesting Arizona business licenses to fulfill regulatory obligations. Tax documents were reissued, rerouted. Our cloud storage vendor, one of the big ones, kicked off a re-authentication process due to the jurisdictional change in billing origin. That one was fun to watch. Their billing team flagged the inconsistency, locked access, and triggered a 30-day compliance audit. No one could upload documents for half a day. For a company that runs on shared files and contracts, that's a heart attack moment. And still, not one person called me directly. Not Mark, not HR, not legal. They were too proud, or too scared, or maybe just too clueless. I had become the invisible hand they couldn't slap away. I could picture them scrambling, Slack messages flying, Zoom meetings stacked back to back, people pointing fingers and forwarding contracts they never bothered to read when they were signed. And somewhere in that chaos, someone would eventually find the document with my name still on it. Not as a consultant, not as a contractor. As an operational signatory with full transitional authority on facility designation and asset reallocation, something they never revoked. I'd known they wouldn't catch it in time, not with how lean they'd run the ops team after my exit. They let the institutional memory walk out the door with me, and now the machine was grinding gears without anyone who knew where the oil was. I wasn't in this for revenge, not in the comic book sense. I didn't want to torch the place. I didn't want them bankrupt or humiliated. But I did want them to feel what it was like to be unmoored, to have the ground shift under your feet with no warning. That's what they did to me. They made me feel powerless, replaceable. So now, I was simply reminding them that power doesn't always look like a corner office or a title. Sometimes, it looks like an overlooked clause in a dusty file folder, and the guy who remembers it. I watched the chaos grow from the comfort of my small Chandler apartment. I hadn't told anyone what I was doing, not even my wife. She just saw me smile more during dinner, sleep better, and stop reaching for antacids every other night. "You're healing," she said once, stroking my arm. "Whatever it is, I'm glad." I just nodded. Because the truth was, I wasn't healing. I was finishing something. The call finally came on a Tuesday, mid-morning. I was trimming dead leaves off the succulents my daughter had guilted me into keeping alive. The phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in a while. Company area code, high extension. I let it ring once, twice. Then I answered like I didn't know exactly who it was. "Alex MERCER," I said. There was a pause. Then a voice I hadn't heard in almost 4 months. "Alex, it's Mark." He said it like we were old friends who hadn't caught up in a while, like he hadn't sat across from me in that glass box and handed me a future I didn't ask for. I didn't respond. Let the silence push on his ribs. "So," he continued, "we've run into a bit of a situation with some of the facility paperwork. It seems like there's been a misunderstanding with the designation of the Chandler office." "Misunderstanding," I repeated, like I was tasting the word. "I think we just need to clear a few things up. You were still listed as trustee on some legacy forms. It's honestly kind of funny, bit of a glitch. But no harm done. We're hoping you can help us untangle it." There it was. The shift. He was playing nice, but underneath it, the tightness in his voice, the way he said we're hoping like it was a favor and not a white flag surrender. It told me everything I needed to know. They were bleeding, losing vendor access, delayed filings, even an HR payroll hiccup that left half the Arizona team in limbo last week. All fixable, of course. But only if someone knew where the wires were buried. I'm not sure it's a glitch, I said calmly. Everything was within my authority at the time. Another pause, longer, tighter. I get it, Mark said. You're angry. I would be too. But come on, Alex. This is childish. You've made your point. Can we just talk this through like adults? You want to talk like adults, Mark? I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected. Then let's start by acknowledging that you fired me without cause, without severance, and with full knowledge that I'd been holding your infrastructure together for a decade. He exhaled, sharp, through the nose. That's not how this works. No, I said. That's exactly how you thought it worked. But I didn't write the rules, Mark. I just enforced the ones you signed without reading. The silence that followed was different. A vacuum. A tiny implosion on the other end of the line. I want a meeting, he said finally. In person, tomorrow. You name the place. It was what I'd been waiting for. Not to yell, not to gloat, but to sit across from the man who forgot where he came from and show him what it looks like when someone remembers. Chandler office, noon, I said. You'll want to bring legal. And I hung up. He showed up 15 minutes early. That told me everything I needed to know. The situation back in Denver was worse than they'd let on. Mark stood in the lobby of the Chandler office, looking smaller than I remembered. Maybe it was the desert light. Maybe it was just the first time I'd seen him without the weight of power behind him. He wasn't surrounded by VPs or HR handlers, just one tight-lipped corporate attorney and a company-issued laptop he clutched like a life raft. I let him wait. Not to be petty, just long enough to remind him that I controlled the room now. When I walked in, I didn't shake his hand. I just nodded and motioned toward a small conference room with bad acoustics and worse coffee. The same room where, years ago, I'd trained 3 regional managers who'd now all mysteriously disappeared from the org chart. Mark tried to start soft. A few lines about rebuilding trust and mutual benefit. I let him talk. Let him wear himself out with all the corporate fluff he'd once accused me of being too operational to understand. Then I slid a printed document across the table. 1 page, bullet points, clear, clean, no emotion. He read it in silence. I watched his eyes scan the paper, then flick up at me, then back down. My terms weren't outrageous, just honest. Reinstate my severance, not some petty sum, but what I was owed for my years of service. Issue a formal retraction of my termination for restructuring, and publicly credit my transition oversight during the Arizona facility review, something I worded carefully to sound like a gracious handover, rather than the power shift it really was. The lawyer leaned in to whisper. Mark waved him off. "You want your name back in the lights?" he said. I smiled, but there was no heat in it. "I want the truth back in the file. You're not here to negotiate, Mark. You're here to close the book." He looked out the window, then back at the paper. His fingers drummed on the table like they used to in meetings when he was thinking faster than he could speak. Finally, he picked up the pen. "Done," he said, and signed. It was quiet after that. We didn't shake hands. He stood, thanked me stiffly, and walked out with his lawyer trailing behind him, already dialing someone on his phone. Probably legal, probably damage control. I stayed behind for a moment, just me and that beige conference room and the weird hum of satisfaction that started in my chest and spread to my hands. I didn't ruin their company. I didn't burn anything down. All I did was remind them, that the people who build the walls always know where the bricks can crack. I walked out into the Arizona sun, exhaled, and smiled. For the first time in months, I wasn't a former employee. I was a man who ended his story on his own terms,